war had lasted 11 years before the Galactic Concord decided humans were cheating. That was the only word for it. In the eyes of the Alien Council, humans were cheating at war. They did not fight the way the old species fought. They did not follow the slow, careful rules that had kept peace between the stars for 3,000 years. They built strange ships, fought strange battles, and somehow, again and again, they won fights they should have lost. So the Concord did what old, tired powers always do when a young power refuses to lose. They changed the rules. The announcement came on a gray morning over New Shanghai Station, the largest human shipyard in the Sol Reach. Admiral Elena Voss was standing on the observation deck, watching two damaged cruisers limp into dock, when the message arrived on every screen in human space at once. It was not sent quietly. It was sent to every station, every ship, every colony, so that no human anywhere could pretend they had not heard it. The message was read by a translator program in a flat, calm voice, because the Concord never spoke to humans directly if they could help it. By unanimous vote of the Galactic Concord Council, the following is declared: effective immediately, all human vessels exceeding 400 meters in length, or possessing more than 12 primary weapon mounts, are classified as illegal war machines, under the Concord Ship Accord. Any such vessel encountered by Concord forces or Allied fleets will be treated as a hostile target and destroyed without warning. Human colonies are given 90 standard days to comply. Elena read the message twice. Then she read it a third time, because she wanted to be sure she was not misunderstanding the aliens' careful, bloodless language. They were not asking humanity to stop fighting. They were asking humanity to stop fighting well. Every human warship that had turned the tide of a battle in the last 5 years was bigger than 400 meters. The Concord's own dreadnoughts, the towering slow giants that had ruled the stars for 1,000 years before humans arrived, were 800 meters and more. But those ships were grandfathered in under historical treaty status, a phrase that meant nothing, except that the rules applied to everyone, except the people who wrote them. Elena set down her coffee, which had gone cold, and called for a shuttle to Earth. The war itself had started small, the way most wars do, over something that seemed unimportant at the time. 11 years before, a human survey ship called the Amelia Earhart had drifted into a sector claimed by a minor Concord species called the Vashtu, a tall, patient people who bred slow and lived long and did not like surprises. The Vashtu fired first. Human records were clear on that point, though the Concord's official history books told it differently. The Amelia Earhart, unarmed, was destroyed with all 41 crew aboard. Earth's response was not calm. It was not measured. It was not the kind of response the Concorde expected from a species that had only had faster-than-light travel for 60 years. Within 6 months, human warships had pushed the Vashtu out of 3 systems. Within 2 years, half a dozen other Concorde member species, worried about this strange new predator on their doorstep, had joined the fight against humanity, and the war that everyone had called a border skirmish became something much larger. The Concorde had expected a short war. They had fought wars like this before, against young species who thought courage could make up for centuries of missing technology. Usually those wars ended in a generation or two, with the young species absorbed quietly into the Concorde's endless bureaucracy, taught to be patient, taught to know their place among the stars. Humans did not learn their place. Humans built ships that did not look like Concorde ships, where Concorde dreadnoughts were slow-moving fortresses built for prestige as much as battle. Human ships were fast, ugly, covered in weapons that fired constantly, instead of in the stately ritualized volleys the Concorde favored. Human commanders took risks that would have been called reckless by any Concorde officer's training, and more often than the Concorde liked, those risks paid off. By the time Elena Voss stood on that observation deck reading the Concorde's new law, humanity had won more battles than it had lost. Not because human ships were better built, not exactly. Human shipyards were still smaller, human industry still younger, human fleets still outnumbered nearly everywhere. But humans built ships that could hurt the enemy in ways the enemy did not expect, and human crews fought with a hunger the old species had forgotten how to feel. The Concorde could not outbuild humanity's cleverness, so they decided to outlaw it instead. Chancellor Arya Kowalski, the elected head of the Terran Republic, called an emergency session of the World Council 4 hours after the Concorde's announcement. Elena Voss was there, standing at the back of the chamber in her dress uniform, watching 200 representatives from every human nation argue in 6 languages about what to do next. "We comply," said the representative from the Pan-Asian bloc, a tired-looking man named Minister Feng. "We have no choice. Every ship above 400 meters, we scrap or we convert to civilian use. We keep the small ships. We keep fighting the way we can." "And when the Concorde decides 400 meters is still too big?" asked General Okonkwo Reyes, the head of Earth's ground forces, who had flown in from the African Defense Command that morning. "When they decide 200 meters is illegal, 300? This is not a law, this is a leash. They are shortening it 1 click at a time, until we cannot fight at all." The chamber erupted into arguing voices. Arya Kowalski let it go on for almost a full minute, before she raised her hand for silence, and slowly, the room quieted. "I want to hear from the fleet," she said, and looked directly at Elena Voss. "Admiral, tell us honestly, if we comply with this law, scrap every ship above 400 meters, what happens to the war?" Elena walked to the front of the chamber. She had given hard reports before, but never one this hard. "We lose," she said simply, "not right away, but we lose. Our large ships are what let us punch above our weight. The Vash-2 battle line, the Concorde relief fleet at Tau Ceti, the defense of Liberty Station last year. Every one of those victories came from ships larger than 400 meters. Take those away, and we go back to fighting the way the Concorde wants us to fight. Small, cautious, patient. And patient is a game the Concorde has been playing for 3,000 years. We have been playing it for 11. We will lose that game every time." "And if we refuse to comply?" Arya asked. "Then in 90 days, every ship we have above 400 meters becomes a legal target, everywhere, with no warning required. They will not need to declare war on those ships. They will just destroy them, and call it enforcing the law." Elena paused. "We will lose our best ships in the opening hours of a fight we did not choose to start." Silence settled over the chamber. Arya Kowalski looked down at her hands for a long moment. "Then we need a third option," she said. "Something the Concorde has not thought of." The third option was born that same night, in a much smaller room, with far fewer people, and far less shouting. Dr. Marcus Chen was 44 years old, the chief structural engineer of the Seoul Reach Shipbuilding Authority, and possibly the most tired man in human space. He had been awake for 19 hours when Admiral Voss walked into his office at the new Shanghai Design Labs and set a tablet down on his desk without a word. Marcus read the Concorde's announcement. He read it twice. 400 meters, he said. 12 weapon mounts. "That's specific, oddly specific." "It's specific because they built it around us," Elena said. "They looked at our fleet doctrine and drew the line just below where we actually win fights." Marcus leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. "So we build smaller ships. Smarter ships. We work around the—" "I don't want to work around it," Elena said. "I want to walk through the front door." Marcus lowered his hand and looked at her properly for the first time since she had walked in. "The law says anything above 400 meters is illegal," Elena continued. "It says anything above 12 weapon mounts is illegal. It does not say we cannot build ships. It does not say there is a maximum size at all. It only draws a line at 400 meters, because that is where they think our advantage stops mattering, and their advantage begins." "Elena, what are you asking me?" "I'm asking you," Elena said slowly, "what happens if we stop trying to stay under their line, and instead, build something so far past it that their line stops being relevant at all?" Marcus stared at her. "You want to build something bigger than a Concorde dreadnought?" "I want to build something bigger than anything the Concorde has ever put into space," Elena said. "Something so large, so heavily armed, so far outside every category they have written laws for, that when it arrives, their entire legal framework becomes a joke. You cannot enforce a 400-meter limit against a ship that is 4 kilometers long, Marcus. You can only try to fight it, and if we build it right, they will lose that fight." For a long moment, Marcus Chen said nothing at all. Then, slowly, something that might have been the beginning of a smile crossed his exhausted face. 4 kilometers, he repeated. "Do you have any idea what that would take? The materials alone, the shipyards we'd need, the crew requirements, the power core. I know it sounds impossible, Elena said. It's not impossible, Marcus said, and now he was sitting up straighter, reaching for a stylus, pulling up a blank design file on his desk screen. It's insane. Those are different words. Impossible means it can't be done. Insane just means nobody has been crazy enough to try. Word of the project, which would eventually be called Project Colossus, though at the start it had no name at all beyond the thing Marcus Chen is drawing at 3 in the morning, spread slowly, carefully, and only to people who could be trusted. The World Council debated the idea for 6 days, in sessions that grew louder and angrier each time. Minister Feng called it madness, a fantasy that would bankrupt the Republic and give the Concord every excuse it needed to end the war with a single overwhelming strike. General Okonkwo Reyes, to everyone's surprise, became the project's loudest supporter, arguing that 90 days of pretending to comply while doing nothing was a slower kind of surrender. In the end, it was Arya Kowalski who made the decision, in the quiet hour after the council had gone home, and only she, Elena, and Marcus remained in the chamber. 90 days, Arya said. That is how long we have, before the law takes effect, and every large ship we own becomes a target. How long would this ship of yours take to build? Marcus hesitated. Working every shipyard we have, pulling every resource we can spare, cutting every corner that doesn't get people killed. 2 years. Maybe less, if we get lucky. Maybe more if we don't. Then we do not have 90 days, Arya said. We have 90 days to hide the fact that we are building it at all. Elena frowned. Chancellor? We comply, Arya said, and for the first time that week, there was something like a smile on her tired face. Publicly, loudly, in front of every Concord observer and spy satellite watching Sol reach. We scrap our large ships, we announce it to the stars, we give speeches about respecting Concord law, and while the Concord watches us surrender with one hand, we build with the other, Elena finished. 90 days to convince the galaxy we have given up, Arya said. 2 years to prove them wrong. The next morning, the Terran Republic announced its compliance with the Concord Ship Accord. 17 human warships, each over 400 meters, were officially decommissioned. News feeds across human space showed footage of the great vessels being towed to breaking yards. Concord observers, satisfied, reported back to their council that the young, stubborn species had finally learned patience. What the news feeds did not show, and what the Concord observers did not see, was that of those 17 ships, only 4 were actually broken down for scrap. The other 13 were quietly gutted, their hulls stripped of anything valuable, and towed under cover of ordinary supply convoys to a shipyard that did not exist on any official Republic register. A construction platform built inside the debris field of a dead moon in the outer Sol reach, shielded from long-range sensors by kilometers of rock and ice, a place that would soon be known only by its project code. Colossus. Marcus Chen stood on the observation platform of that hidden yard 3 weeks later, watching the first true keel section, a spine of reinforced alloy longer than any ship humanity had ever built, being lowered into place by a fleet of automated construction drones. It stretched away into the dark, lit by work lights, impossibly long, impossibly ambitious. Beside him, Elena Voss watched the same sight in silence. 2 years, Marcus said quietly. If the Concord finds this place even a month early, none of it matters. Then we make sure they don't find it, Elena said, and we make sure that when they do, it's already too late to stop. Above them, framed by the stars, the skeleton of the largest ship humanity had ever attempted began, slowly, to grow. Not everyone believed in the project, even among the small circle who knew it existed. Captain Diego Alvarez had commanded the cruiser Santiago for 6 years, through some of the worst fighting of the war. He had lost friends at Tau Ceti. He had lost half his crew defending Liberty Station. When Elena Voss called him into a private briefing room and told him about Project Colossus, his first reaction was not excitement, it was anger. You want to spend 2 years and half our industrial capacity building one ship, he said, while the rest of the fleet fights the war with what's left over. Admiral, with respect, that's not a plan. That's a gamble with the whole species. It's both, Elena admitted. I won't pretend otherwise. But look at the numbers, Diego. Every year, the Concord brings more of its member species into the fight against us. Every year, our shipyards fall further behind theirs. We cannot win a war of patience. We proved that 11 years ago, and we've been living on borrowed time ever since. This law is the Concord's way of telling us the borrowed time is up. So your answer is one ship. My answer is one ship so big, so dangerous, that it changes what winning even means, Elena said. The Concord's whole strategy depends on numbers, on grinding us down over decades. A ship like this doesn't need to win 1,000 small battles. It needs to win one very large one, at the right place, at the right time, and make every Concord admiral in the galaxy afraid to bring their fleet within 100 light-years of it. Diego was quiet for a long moment, then he asked the question that mattered most to him. Who commands it? Elena did not answer right away. That hasn't been decided. It should be someone who's actually fought them, Diego said. Not a desk admiral, not a politician's favorite. Someone who's watched good crews die because our ships weren't big enough or strong enough to save them. I know, Elena said quietly. I was there too, Diego. I haven't forgotten. While Marcus Chen's construction crews worked in secret behind the ice fields of the outer Sol Reach, the war above Earth's skies did not pause to wait for them. 3 months into the project, a Concord scout fleet probed the edge of human territory near the colony world of New Manila, testing the Republic's compliance with the new ship accord. They found exactly what the Concord wanted to find. Human ships under 400 meters, human weapons within the legal limit, human commanders following the rules the Concord had written. The scout fleet reported back that humanity had been successfully tamed. They did not know about the ice field. They did not know about the growing spine of alloy hidden in its shadow, or the 11,000 workers who now labored around the clock in 3 shifts to build something that broke every rule the Concord had ever imagined a young species might follow. Arya Kowalski gave speeches to the Concord's diplomatic envoys about respecting galactic law. She spoke of peace, of patience, of humanity's willingness to learn from older, wiser species. Privately, in the sealed rooms beneath the Republic's capital, she signed order after order diverting shipyard resources, rare materials, and skilled engineers toward a project that officially did not exist. It was, Marcus Chen said once to Elena, the strangest kind of lie he had ever helped tell. A lie made entirely of true things, arranged to point in the wrong direction. By the 6th month, the keel of Colossus stretched 3 kilometers through the dark, a skeleton of alloy and structural lattice that dwarfed every station and shipyard in the Sol Reach. Marcus had redesigned the hull twice already, once when early stress tests revealed the frame would buckle under its own mass, without new bracing techniques borrowed, ironically, from Concord architecture, and once again, when the fusion engineers reported that no existing human reactor design could power a ship this size without a complete rebuild of the core systems. It was Dr. Priya Nair, the project's chief power engineer, who solved that problem, though it cost her nearly a year of sleepless nights. Her solution was not elegant, it was not clever in the way human ship designs usually were. It was simply enormous, a cluster of 9 linked fusion cores, each one larger than an ordinary warship's entire reactor, feeding a central distribution spine that ran the length of the vessel like a spinal cord of pure energy. If even one core fails during operation, Priya told Elena during a tense briefing in the 9th month, the cascade could tear the ship apart from the inside. We need redundancy systems we haven't built yet. We need containment fields stronger than anything currently in production. Then we build them, Elena said. That's easy to say. I know, Elena said. I'm not the one who has to build it, but I trust the people who do. Priya did not smile often, but she smiled then, tired and a little bitter, and went back to work. Word of Project Colossus began, slowly, to spread beyond the small circle who had started it. Soldiers talked to soldiers. Engineers talked to their families, in careful, coded ways that would not survive close scrutiny, but were enough to plant a rumor. By the end of the first year, most of human space had heard whispers of a ship being built somewhere in secret, something enormous, something that would end the war. The Republic government neither confirmed nor denied the rumors. Officially, humanity remained in full compliance with the Concord Ship Accord. Unofficially, the rumors did something almost as valuable as the ship itself. They gave people hope. Diego Alvarez felt that hope too, even as he continued to fly patrol routes along the contested border in his cruiser Santiago, fighting the same grinding, patient war the Concorde had always wanted humanity to fight. He lost 2 more crew members that year, in a skirmish near the Kepler belt that should never have happened, that happened only because his ship was too small, too limited, too bound by a law written specifically to make sure ships like his could never be enough. He kept a photo of both of them in his quarters. He looked at it every night before sleep, and every night he thought about the ship growing in the dark behind the ice fields, and he told himself it had better be worth it. Near the end of the first year, Marcus Chen stood with Elena Voss at the edge of the construction platform, looking up at what had once been a skeleton of alloy, and was now, unmistakably, the shape of a ship. Its outer hull plating had begun, section by section, to close over the internal frame. Its length, already confirmed at just over 4 kilometers, made even the largest Concorde dreadnought look like a shuttlecraft by comparison. "We're going to need a name eventually," Marcus said. "Something better than a project code." Elena thought about it for a long moment, watching the work lights crawl slowly across that vast, growing hull. "Colossus," she said finally. "Let them find out what that word means when we're ready, and not a moment before." Behind them, in the depths of Concorde space, the Council continued its slow, patient business, confident that the 90-day deadline had done exactly what it was meant to do, confident that humanity, like every young species before it, had finally learned to know its place. They had no idea how wrong they were. The second year of Project Colossus began with a problem that almost ended it. A Concorde trade envoy, a slow, careful species called the Orith who acted as neutral messengers between warring factions, requested permission to survey human shipyards as part of a routine compliance check. It was a right written into the original ship accord, one the Republic could not refuse without raising suspicion. Arya Kowalski had 96 hours to decide what to do before the Orith survey ship arrived in the Sol Reach. "We can't let them anywhere near the ice field," Marcus Chen said, standing in the underground war room beneath the Republic capital, his voice tight with something close to panic. "One pass, with real sensors, and they'll see a ship 4 kilometers long, sitting behind a debris shield. That's not something we can explain away." "We don't let them get close," Elena Voss said. "We control what they survey and when. Standard procedure for a compliance check is to visit the 3 largest registered shipyards, New Shanghai, Ceres Station, and the Lagrange yards. None of those are anywhere near the ice field. And if they ask to see more, then we remind them, politely, that the ship accord grants inspection rights to registered facilities, not a blank warrant to search all of human space," Arya said. "We follow the letter of their own law against them. It's the only weapon they've given us." The Orith envoy arrived on schedule, a small ship with a crew of 11, led by an elderly diplomat named Sresa who had negotiated treaties for over 200 years, and had seen, in that time, every trick a young species could try. Diego Alvarez was assigned to escort the survey ship personally, under orders to be courteous, cooperative, and utterly unhelpful about anything beyond the 3 approved shipyards. It was, Diego thought privately, the strangest mission of his career. He had spent 11 years fighting the Concorde. Now he spent 4 days being their tour guide, smiling through gritted teeth as Sresa's translator drone asked polite, precise questions about hull tonnage and weapon counts, questions clearly designed to catch a lie. On the 3rd day, over a formal dinner neither side particularly wanted, Sresa set down her utensils and looked at Diego with old, patient eyes. "Captain Alvarez," she said, through the translator, "there are rumors among my people, rumors of a large project in your territory. A ship, perhaps, larger than the law permits." Diego kept his expression carefully neutral. "Rumors travel fast in wartime, Ambassador. I've heard rumors the Concorde is planning to lower the size limit again, to 300 meters. I don't put much faith in rumors." Sresa studied him for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, something that might have been a smile crossed her lined gray face. "Perhaps we understand each other better than my council would like," she said, and did not raise the subject again. The survey concluded without incident. Sresa's report to the Concorde Council confirmed, with careful diplomatic language, that human shipyards appeared to be in full compliance with the ship accord, though she noted, almost as an afterthought, that rumors of a large secret project could not be entirely dismissed and might warrant future investigation. That single line very nearly ended everything. 3 weeks after the Orith envoy departed, Concorde long-range sensor drones began appearing at the edge of the Sol Reach in greater numbers than before. Quiet, unmanned probes, designed to map human territory in more detail than any treaty officially allowed. Marcus Chen's security teams detected the first one drifting just outside the ice field's debris shield, close enough that its passive sensors might, given enough time, pick up the faint thermal signature of 11,000 workers and 9 fusion cores hidden behind the rock and ice. We need to decide, right now, what we do if one of these things gets a clear reading, Marcus told Elena during an emergency call. Because if it does, and it phones home, the Concorde will know exactly where we are, and exactly what we're building, more than a year before this ship is ready to fight. Then we make sure it doesn't get a clear reading, Elena said. The solution, when it came, was not elegant. It was, like so much of Project Colossus, simply enormous. Marcus's engineers built a false debris field, layers of scrap metal and ice seeded with reactor cores stripped from decommissioned ships, radiating just enough heat and radiation to look, from a distance, like a dead moon slowly breaking apart under gravitational stress, a natural phenomenon, not a shipyard. The real construction platform was buried deeper, shielded by both the original ice field and this new false signature layered over it. It worked. The Concorde drones recorded a dying moon, and nothing more, and moved on to survey other sectors, and the war room beneath the Republic capital breathed its first easy breath in almost a month. But everyone who knew the truth understood how close it had been. One good sensor pass, one moment of bad luck, and 2 years of work would have ended not in victory, but in a Concorde battle fleet, arriving to erase Project Colossus before it ever left the yard. Inside the hidden shipyard, the work continued, at a pace that would have broken most ordinary projects. Marcus Chen slept, on average, 4 hours a night, and most of those hours were spent in a cot, bolted to the wall of his design office, rather than any actual bed. He had not seen his family on Earth in 8 months. His daughter, 11 years old when the project began, sent him messages he often did not have time to answer for days. He kept every one of them, he told himself, on the nights when the exhaustion felt unbearable, that he was building this ship so she would grow up in a galaxy where humans were not hunted for the crime of building good ships. Dr. Priya Nair's power core cluster reached full assembly in the 14th month. 9 linked fusion reactors, arranged in a ring around the ship's central spine, each one wrapped in 3 redundant containment layers that had taken her team nearly a year to design and test. The first full activation test was scheduled for a Tuesday morning, that Priya would later describe as the longest hour of her life. If this goes wrong, she told her assembled team before the test began, it goes wrong very fast, and none of us will have time to be surprised about it. So let's not go wrong. The cores activated in sequence, one after another, each one humming to life and feeding its output into the central spine. Elena Voss watched from the observation deck as the ship, for the first time, generated its own power, instead of relying on external umbilical feeds from the construction platform. Lights flickered on across kilometers of hull. Internal systems, tested only in isolated pieces until now, came online together for the first time, and held. Priya Nair did not celebrate. She simply sat down on the deck plating, put her head in her hands, and breathed for a long, quiet minute, while her team cheered around her. 9 cores, she said finally, looking up at Elena. Enough power to run a mid-sized city, and we're using it to move one ship through space. I don't know whether that's the most impressive thing I've ever built, or the most ridiculous. Why not both? Elena said, and for the first time in months, she actually smiled. Not every development that year was good news. In the 17th month, a Concorde relief fleet broke through human defenses near the border colony of Meridian, a mining world with a population of nearly 2 million. The Republic's remaining fleet, spread thin across a dozen fronts and still limited by the ship accord's size restrictions, could not gather enough ships in time to stop the assault. Meridian's orbital defenses held for 6 days before falling. ground forces held for another 11. Diego Alvarez, flying escort for a relief convoy that arrived 4 days too late, watched from orbit as Concord ground forces secured the colony's capital city. He filed a report that night that Elena Voss read twice before setting it aside, unable, for a long moment, to speak. 2 million people, Diego's report said, under a government that will now teach them to be patient, the way the Concord teaches every young colony it conquers. We could not save them. Our ships were not big enough, not fast enough, not strong enough. I do not know how many more meridians we can afford to lose while we wait for one ship to be ready. Elena carried that report with her when she next visited the hidden shipyard. She showed it to Marcus Chen without a word, and watched him read it, and watched something in his tired face harden into something colder and more determined than she had seen from him before. "How much longer?" she asked quietly. "Can we shorten the timeline without getting people killed?" Marcus was silent for a long moment, staring at the growing hull of Colossus through the observation window, at the armor plating crawling slowly across 4 kilometers of frame, at the weapon emplacements being fitted section by section into place. 6 months, he said finally. Maybe less, if we accept some risk in the untested systems. But Elena, if we rush this, and something fails in the field, we don't just lose a ship, we lose the only real chance this species has of ending this war on our own terms. I need you to understand that before you ask me to move faster. I understand it, Elena said. I also understand Meridian. 6 months, Marcus. Do what you can. The 18th month brought a strange and unexpected visitor to the hidden shipyard. Chancellor Arya Kowalski herself, traveling under heavy secrecy aboard an unmarked transport, risking a journey that her own Security Council had argued against for days, before finally, reluctantly, allowing it. I needed to see it, Arya told Elena, standing on the observation platform for the first time, looking up at a hull that now stretched, fully plated, the entire 4-kilometer length of the ship's frame. Weapon turrets, still being fitted, dotted its surface in patterns that made even seasoned military officers pause. I've spent 18 months signing orders and giving speeches about something I had only seen in design files and progress reports. I needed to see it was real. It's real, Elena said, or it will be, in 6 more months, if Marcus's team can hold the pace. Arya was quiet for a long time, looking up at the ship that would, one way or another, decide the fate of everything she had spent her life building. They took Meridian, she said finally. 2 million of our people, and I could not send enough ships to save them, because the ships that could have made a difference were sitting here, unfinished, waiting. I have to live with that decision every day, Admiral. I need this to be worth it. It will be, Elena said, and found, to her own surprise, that she believed it completely. 6 months, Chancellor. Give us 6 more months, and we will show the Concord exactly what happens when you write a law meant to make a species small, and that species decides to become something the law never imagined. Above them, in the cold dark of the outer Sol reach, Colossus continued to grow, no longer a skeleton, no longer just a frame, but something that was beginning, unmistakably, to look like the largest weapon humanity had ever built. Weapons design for a ship of this size presented problems no human engineer had ever faced before, and the man responsible for solving most of them was a quiet, stubborn weapons specialist named Rajiv Okafor, who had spent the first year of the project simply arguing with everyone about what Colossus was actually supposed to do. A ship this size has 2 choices, Rajiv told Elena during a design review in the 15th month. It can be a fortress, covered in as many small and medium weapons as we can fit, designed to grind down anything that comes near it through sheer volume of fire. Or it can be a spear, built around a small number of truly massive weapons, designed to end a fight in 1 or 2 decisive strikes. We cannot fully commit to both without compromising each. What do you recommend? Elena asked. Both, badly, or one? Well, Rajiv said. I recommend one. Well, give me the ship's entire dorsal spine, and I will build you a single weapon capable of doing more damage than an entire Concord battle line firing together. But it will need most of the ship's power reserve to charge, and it will only be able to fire once every several minutes. Everything else on the hull will need to be smaller point defense and secondary weapons, meant to keep the ship alive between those shots, not win the fight on their own. The weapon Rajiv eventually designed was called, in official documents, the spine cannon, though the engineering crews who built it took to calling it simply the fist. It ran nearly the full length of the ship's dorsal section, a particle accelerator array fed directly from the 9-core reactor cluster, capable of firing a single concentrated bolt of energy that Rajiv's simulations predicted could punch through the shielding and armor of even the largest Concorde dreadnought in a single hit. Building it took the better part of a year, and testing it took nearly as long again, because a weapon of that scale could not simply be fired in the enclosed space of the hidden shipyard without risking catastrophic damage to the ship itself. The first live test firing took place in the 19th month, far from the ice field, in a stretch of empty space, chosen because it contained nothing worth destroying by accident. Elena Voss, Marcus Chen, Priya Nair, and Rajiv Okafor stood together on the bridge, still under construction around them, wires and unfinished panels exposed along the walls, watching through the main viewport as the spine cannon charged for the first time under its own power. "Charge at 90%, Priya reported, watching her instruments with the tight, controlled focus of someone who had spent a year making sure this exact moment did not kill everyone aboard. 95, 98, we are go for firing." "Fire," Elena said. The bolt of energy that left the ship's dorsal spine was visible, even in open space, a brief, blinding line of light that crossed nearly 400,000 kilometers in less than a second and struck a target asteroid the size of a small moon that Rajiv's team had towed into position for the test. When the light faded, the asteroid was gone, not damaged, not cracked apart, gone, reduced to dust and gravel scattered across a wide arc of space. Nobody on the bridge spoke for a long moment. "Well," Rajiv said finally, his voice a little unsteady, "I think we can call that test successful." By the 20th month, the internal systems of Colossus were coming together in a way that finally let Elena Voss walk its corridors and believe, for the first time, that she was walking through a real warship and not simply a construction site. Crew quarters, capable of housing over 40,000 personnel, stretched through the ship's midsection. Hangar bays large enough to launch entire squadrons of fighters at once lined its flanks. A command bridge, built at the very heart of the ship where it would be hardest to reach in any attack, began to receive its final instrumentation. Diego Alvarez, still flying patrol duty along the war's grinding front lines, finally received the orders he had been quietly hoping for since his conversation with Elena 2 years earlier: a transfer to the hidden shipyard, and a new assignment as one of Colossus's senior tactical officers. He arrived at the ice field for the first time in the 21st month, and stood on the same observation platform where Marcus Chen and Elena Voss had stood so many times before him, and found that no amount of briefing documents or progress reports had prepared him for the sight of the ship itself. 4 kilometers, he said quietly, almost to himself. 4.2 actually, Marcus said, walking up beside him. "We added a little extra to the hangar bays in the final redesign. You must be Captain Alvarez. Admiral Voss speaks highly of you." "I've heard a lot about this ship," Diego said. "I don't think anything could have prepared me for actually seeing it." "Get used to that feeling," Marcus said. "Everyone who comes here has it. Then, in about a month, you start seeing it as just a very large collection of engineering problems, and the feeling fades. I almost miss it, honestly, being amazed by my own project." Diego spent his first weeks aboard learning systems that existed nowhere else in human space: weapon arrays and shield configurations and power distribution networks, built for a ship larger than most human space stations. He met Priya Nair, who walked him through the reactor cluster, with the careful pride of someone showing off a child's achievement. He met Rajiv Okafor, who spent nearly 2 hours explaining the spine cannon's targeting systems in more technical detail than Diego could fully follow, but whose obvious passion for the weapon was impossible not to respect. And slowly, over those weeks, Diego began to understand what Elena Voss had seen from the very beginning: that Colossus was not simply a bigger ship. It was a different kind of answer entirely to a question the Concorde had never expected humanity to ask. The 22nd month brought the crisis everyone involved with the project had quietly feared since the beginning. A Concorde long-range patrol, larger and better equipped than the drones that had probed the Sol Reach 2 years before, entered the outer system on a course that would take it directly past the edge of the false debris field Marcus's team had built to hide the shipyard. Unlike the earlier drones, this patrol carried a crew, and active sensors far more sophisticated than anything that had come before. "They're going to pass within 200,000 kilometers of the real shield," Marcus reported to Elena, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. "At that range, with active sensors, there is a real chance they see through the false signature. We built it to fool passive drones scanning from a distance, not a crude patrol running a close, deliberate survey." "Options," Elena said. "We could power down everything non-essential," Marcus said. "Cut our own signature as low as possible, hope the false field is enough on its own. Or? Marcus hesitated. "Or Colossus intercepts them. Quietly, before they get close enough to see anything." Elena was silent for a moment, thinking through the implications. Colossus was not yet fully crewed, not yet fully armed, not yet ready by any measure to reveal itself to the galaxy. But the alternative, allowing a Concord patrol to potentially discover the project 2 years into its construction, with 6 months still remaining before completion, was a risk she could not accept. In the end, the solution came from an unexpected source, Diego Alvarez, who proposed using a squadron of smaller human ships, already stationed nearby, under cover of routine patrol duty, to intercept the Concord vessel on a plausible pretext, delaying and redirecting its course, without ever revealing that anything beyond ordinary border patrol activity was taking place. It worked, though barely. The Concord patrol, engaged in what appeared to be a routine border dispute with human forces, altered course to avoid what its sensors registered as a heavier-than-expected human presence in the area, and passed well outside the range needed to see through the false debris field. Its report back to the Concord Council noted increased human patrol activity in the outer Sol reach, but nothing more. Marcus Chen did not sleep at all that night, watching the sensor logs long after the danger had passed, unable to fully believe how close they had come. By the end of the second year, Colossus was, in every meaningful sense, complete. Its hull was fully plated, its reactor cluster ran at full capacity, its weapon systems, from the massive spine cannon to the hundreds of secondary batteries lining its flanks, had all been tested and proven functional. Its crew complement, drawn from the most experienced officers and sailors in the Republic fleet, had trained aboard for months, learning the systems of a ship unlike any that had ever existed. Elena Voss stood on the bridge, now fully finished, its instrument panels glowing softly in the dim light, and looked at the assembled command staff around her. Marcus Chen, Priya Nair, Rajiv Okafor, Diego Alvarez, and dozens of others who had given 2 years of their lives to this single, impossible project. 2 years ago, she said, the Concord told us our ships were illegal. They told us to make ourselves small, to fight the way they wanted us to fight, to accept a slow decline into whatever place they had decided we belonged. We did not accept that. She looked out through the main viewport, at the stars beyond, at the war still being fought across 100 systems, at the long road that had led to this moment. It's time to show them what we built instead. Colossus left the hidden shipyard for the first time, on a quiet morning that felt, to everyone aboard, far too ordinary for a moment that had taken 2 years to arrive. There was no ceremony. Arya Kowalski had insisted on that point above all others. The ship's first movement had to remain secret for as long as possible, hidden behind the same careful lies that had protected its construction. So Colossus slipped free of the ice field under minimal power, running on backup systems designed to keep its energy signature as close to the false debris field's baseline as engineers could manage, and began the long, slow journey toward open space. Elena Voss stood on the bridge, watching the ice field fall away behind them on the rear display, 2 years of secrecy and sacrifice shrinking into the distance. "Feels strange," Diego Alvarez said quietly, standing beside her. "After all this time hiding it, we're just leaving. No speeches, no fanfare." "The fanfare comes later," Elena said. "Right now, we need distance. Distance, and time to make sure every system on this ship works exactly the way it's supposed to, before we ever have to use it in a real fight." That testing period lasted 6 weeks, conducted far from any Concord patrol routes, in an empty stretch of space near the edge of human-controlled territory. Every weapon system was fired. Every shield configuration was tested under simulated attack. Priya Nair's reactor cluster was pushed to 98% capacity for extended periods, watched over by a team that barely slept, checking and rechecking containment fields that had never been tested outside carefully controlled conditions. Rajiv Okafor ran the spine cannon through a dozen full test cycles, refining its targeting systems, working out the timing between full power charges. Diego Alvarez drilled the tactical crew relentlessly, running war games against simulated Concorde fleets of every size, looking for weaknesses in the ship's defenses before an actual enemy could find them. "It's not going to be like fighting in a smaller ship," Diego told his tactical officers during one of those sessions. "We're not fast. We're not agile. Everything about the way we've fought this war for 11 years has to change. We win by being unstoppable, not by being clever. That's a different kind of discipline." Marcus Chen, meanwhile, spent most of those 6 weeks doing something he had rarely had time for during the 2 years of construction: worrying about small things. A minor fluctuation in one of the hull's structural stress sensors, a slight delay in one hangar bay's launch sequence, problems too small to matter in any real battle, but problems that gnawed at him regardless, because he had spent 2 years building something that could not be allowed to fail. "You built it right," Elena told him, finding him alone in the engineering section late one night, running diagnostics that had already been run 3 times before. "I've seen the test results, Marcus. Every system, working exactly as designed." "I know," Marcus said. "I just keep thinking about all the things we didn't have time to test twice, all the shortcuts we took in the last 6 months, when Meridian happened, and you asked me to move faster. I gave you faster, Elena. I don't know if I gave you perfect." "Nothing is ever perfect," Elena said. "It just has to be enough. And Marcus, it is." While Colossus completed its final testing in secret, the war above continued, and the Concorde, confident that humanity remained bound by the ship accord, grew steadily bolder. A second Concorde offensive struck the border colony of Ashworth Prime in the 24th month, this one larger and better coordinated than the assault on Meridian 2 years before. The Republic fleet, still fighting under the size restrictions of the ship accord everywhere except the hidden shipyard, managed to hold the line this time, but only barely, and only at a terrible cost. 3 cruisers were lost. Over 600 crew members did not come home. Diego Alvarez, watching the casualty reports scroll past on a bridge display aboard Colossus, felt his hands curl into fists at his sides. "We could have ended that fight in an hour," he said quietly to Elena. "One pass with the spine cannon, and that entire Concorde fleet would have been finished before it ever reached Ashworth." "I know," Elena said, "but if we'd revealed this ship 6 weeks early, with untested systems, against a fleet that size, we might have won that one battle and lost the war." "We needed the 6 weeks, Diego. I know it doesn't feel that way when you're reading a casualty list." Diego said nothing, but Elena understood the weight behind his silence. Every day the ship remained hidden was a day more people died in battles it could have ended. That was the terrible math of the entire project, one Elena had carried since the very first night she and Marcus Chen had sketched the idea on a tablet in a tired office in New Shanghai. Sometimes the only way to win a long war was to accept losses in the short one, and live with the weight of that choice afterward. By the 7th week, Marcus Chen finally declared Colossus fully operational, every system tested, every crew position trained and ready. Elena Voss called a final briefing in the ship's largest assembly hall, addressing not just her senior officers but every one of the 40,000 crew members serving aboard, speaking through the ship's internal broadcast system to those who could not fit into the hall itself. 2 years ago, she said, the Concorde declared our ships illegal. They wrote a law designed to make us small, to force us to fight a war of patience against a species that has been patient for 3,000 years. Today, we are going to show them exactly how well that law worked. A murmur ran through the assembled crew, equal parts nervous and eager. Our first target is not a Concorde homeworld. It is not a symbolic strike meant to prove a point. Our first target is the Concorde Relief Fleet, currently besieging the colony of Ashworth Prime, the same fleet that killed 600 of our people 2 weeks ago. We are going to break that siege, and we are going to make sure every Concorde admiral in this sector understands, in the clearest possible terms, that the rules have changed. Elena paused, looking out at the sea of faces before her, young and old, veterans of a decade of war alongside crew members who had never fired a weapon outside a simulation. I will not lie to you. This ship has never fought a real battle. Every system aboard has been tested, but testing is not the same as combat, and I know some of you are afraid. I am afraid too. But I have never in my career commanded a ship, or a crew, that I trusted more than this one. Let's go show them what we built. The journey to Ashworth Prime took 4 days at Colossus's best sustainable speed, slower than any smaller human ship could manage, a reminder of the trade-offs built into a vessel of this size. Diego Alvarez used those 4 days to run one final round of drills, determined that his tactical crew would enter their first real battle as prepared as any crew in human history had ever been. Rajiv Okafor spent the same 4 days in the spine cannon's control room, running calculations and recalculations on targeting solutions, on power draw curves, on every variable he could think, to check one more time, before the weapon he had spent 2 years building faced a real enemy for the first time. Priya Nair kept a careful watch over her reactor cluster, monitoring every fluctuation, every stress reading, determined that the ship's beating heart would not fail at the moment it mattered most. And Marcus Chen, who had no formal combat role aboard the ship he had designed, spent those 4 days simply walking its corridors, checking on crews, answering questions, offering what reassurance he could to people who were about to risk their lives inside a design that existed, until 2 days ago, only in his imagination and his careful calculations. "Are you scared?" a young engineering technician asked him, on the 3rd day, as he checked a hull integrity sensor near one of the aft hangar bays. Marcus considered the question honestly before answering. "Yes," he said, "but I've spent 2 years making sure this ship can do what we need it to do. I trust the work, I trust the crew. Being scared doesn't mean we're not ready. It just means we understand what's at stake." The technician seemed to find some comfort in that answer, and Marcus found, to his own quiet surprise, that he did too. On the morning of the 4th day, Colossus dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Ashworth system, and for the first time, the largest ship humanity had ever built came within sight of an enemy fleet. The Concord Relief Force besieging Ashworth Prime numbered 43 ships, ranging from small escort vessels to 2 aging dreadnoughts, each over 800 meters in length, the kind of ship that had, for 3,000 years, defined what power in the galaxy looked like. Against that fleet, the Republic's remaining defenders at Ashworth numbered only 9 cruisers, badly outmatched, fighting a desperate holding action that everyone aboard those ships knew, deep down, they could not win alone. "Sensor contact," the tactical officer reported, her voice carefully controlled despite the tension in the bridge. 43 Concord vessels, full battle formation around the planet. "Our forces are taking heavy damage, Admiral. They don't have much longer." Elena Voss looked at the tactical display, at the small cluster of desperate human ships fighting to hold a line against overwhelming numbers, and felt the full weight of everything that had led to this moment settle onto her shoulders. "Rajiv," she said, "spine cannon status." "Charged and ready, Admiral." Rajiv Okafor's voice came back over the comm, steady despite the moment. "Target lock available on the lead dreadnought as soon as we're in range." Elena took a slow breath, thinking of Meridian, of Ashworth's first casualty reports, of 2 years of secrecy and sacrifice that had led to exactly this moment. "Take us in," she said. "It's time to end this siege." Colossus surged forward, its massive frame accelerating, with a power no Concord sensor operator watching the battle had ever seen from a human vessel, and on every enemy bridge across that fleet, alarms began, all at once, to scream. Fleet Commander Vesik Thora, leading the Concord siege of Ashworth Prime from the bridge of his flagship dreadnought, the Patient Resolve, had commanded relief fleets for over a century. He had seen young species rise and fall against the Concord's slow, careful strategy, more times than he could easily count. When his sensor officer reported an unidentified vessel of impossible size entering the system, his first reaction was not alarm, it was disbelief. "Confirm those readings," he ordered. "No human vessel is 4 kilometers long. It is not possible under their own compliance agreements." "Confirmed, Fleet Commander," the sensor officer replied, her voice tight with something Vesic had rarely heard from Concorde crew in over 100 years of service. Fear. Mass estimate consistent with a vessel of that size. Power output readings are... Fleet Commander, the readings suggest a reactor output greater than our entire fleet combined. Vesic stared at the tactical display, at the massive shape now visible on long-range sensors, bearing down on his formation at a speed that should have been impossible for something so large. They lied, he said quietly, more to himself than to his bridge crew. For 2 years, they told us they had complied. They showed us scrapped ships and empty shipyards, and this entire time, he did not finish the thought. There was no time. The human vessel had already closed to weapons range, and every instinct built over a century of service told Vesic Thora that whatever was about to happen next would not follow any rule his Concorde had ever written. All ships, he ordered, concentrate fire on the large target. Do not let it reach effective range of our formation. The order came too late. Aboard Colossus, Rajiv Okafor watched his targeting display lock onto the patient resolve, with a focus so complete he barely heard the reports of incoming enemy fire striking the ship's forward shields. Spine cannon fully charged, he reported. Target lock confirmed on lead dreadnought. Fire, Elena Voss said. The bolt of energy that left Colossus's dorsal spine crossed the distance to the patient resolve in less than 2 seconds, striking the dreadnought's forward shields with a force that overwhelmed them instantly, continuing through the hull itself in a single, catastrophic line that left the 800-meter vessel broken in half, venting atmosphere and debris into the void, before its crew had any real chance to understand what had happened to them. On the bridge of Colossus, a brief, stunned silence followed. Then, Diego Alvarez, watching the tactical display with something between horror and awe, spoke the words that would later be recorded in official Republic history. "One shot," he said quietly. "One shot, and their flagship is gone." "Second dreadnought is turning to flee," the tactical officer reported. "The rest of the formation is breaking apart, Admiral. They don't know what to do against us." "Then let's make sure they learn quickly," Elena said. "Secondary batteries, target the escort screen. Diego, launch fighter squadrons to support our people at Ashworth. Let's finish this." What followed was not, by the standards of the war's previous 11 years, a long battle. Colossus's secondary weapon batteries, hundreds of them lining the ship's flanks, tore through the smaller Concorde escort vessels with a volume of fire that no fleet in the sector had ever faced from a single ship. The second dreadnought, attempting to flee rather than face the fate of its flagship, was caught by a second charge of the spine cannon 11 minutes later and destroyed in a single strike, just as the first had been. Within 40 minutes of Colossus's arrival, the Concorde relief fleet that had besieged Ashworth Prime for nearly 3 weeks had ceased to exist as an organized force. 11 vessels managed to escape into faster-than-light travel, fleeing back toward Concorde territory, to report what they had seen. The rest were destroyed, disabled, or had surrendered outright, their crews stunned into submission by a display of power they had never imagined a young species could possess. On the surface of Ashworth Prime, in bunkers and shelters where colonists had huddled for weeks under Concorde bombardment, people emerged to see a sky suddenly, impossibly clear of enemy ships, and a single vast shape hanging in orbit above them, larger than anything they had ever seen. Governor Elise Marchetti, who had led the colony's defense through 3 weeks of siege, watched the recorded footage from Ashworth's orbital sensors with tears in her eyes, footage of a single human ship destroying an entire Concorde relief fleet in less time than it had taken the Concorde to bombard a single district of her capital city. "What is that ship?" she asked, when Elena Voss's image finally appeared on her comm screen, offering formal contact from Colossus's bridge. "That," Elena said, "is what happens when you tell humanity our ships are illegal, and we decide to build one anyway." News of the battle at Ashworth Prime reached the Republic capital within hours, and reached the rest of human space within a day. For the first time since the war began, the story spreading across every human colony was not one of grinding, patient struggle, not one of losses accepted and casualties mourned, but one of overwhelming, decisive victory. Arya Kowalski addressed the World Council that evening, her voice carrying a note of controlled triumph that had been absent from her speeches for 2 long years. For 2 years, she said, we told the Concord we had complied with their law. We told them our large ships were gone, scrapped, dismantled in the name of peace. Today, at Ashworth Prime, they learned the truth. We did not comply. We built something larger than their law ever imagined, and today, that ship broke a siege that would have cost thousands more lives in less than an hour. The chamber erupted in applause, the loudest Arya had heard in years of difficult, exhausting sessions. This is not the end of the war, she continued, once the applause quieted. The Concord will not simply accept this defeat. They will regroup. They will plan a response. But today, for the first time in 11 years, they understand that humanity cannot simply be legislated into submission. Today, they learned what happens when you back a young species into a corner and expect it to stay there. Aboard Colossus, in the quiet hours after the battle, Elena Voss walked the ship's corridors, checking on crews who had just fought their first real engagement, offering what words of comfort and pride she could to people who had, in a single afternoon, changed the course of the war. She found Marcus Chen in the engineering section, still running diagnostics on systems that had performed flawlessly in their first true test, unable, even now, to fully relax. It worked, Elena said, finding him there. Everything you built, Marcus. It worked exactly the way you designed it. Marcus looked up from his instruments, exhaustion, and something like disbelief mixed together on his tired face. 43 ships, he said quietly. We faced 43 Concord ships, including 2 dreadnoughts, and we won in under an hour. I built this ship because I believed it could work, Elena. I don't think I ever really let myself believe it would work this well. Get some rest, Elena said. You've earned it. We all have. But even as she said the words, she understood, better than almost anyone aboard, that rest would have to wait. The battle at Ashworth Prime was not the end of anything. It was only the beginning of a much larger reckoning, one that would bring the full weight of the Concord's fury down on a single human ship, sooner than any of them wanted to believe. The Concord Council convened an emergency session 3 days after the Battle of Ashworth Prime, the first emergency session the Council had called in over 400 years. High Speaker Thulrek Vex, the elder statesman who had first proposed the ship accord 2 years before, stood before the assembled representatives of over 30 member species and watched the recorded footage from the battle for the 4th time that day, still struggling to fully accept what his own eyes showed him. A single human vessel, larger than any ship in recorded Concord history, destroying 2 dreadnoughts and an entire relief fleet in under an hour. They lied to us, said the representative of the Vashtu, the species whose destruction of an unarmed human survey ship had started the war 11 years before. For 2 years, we believed they had complied with the accord. They showed us scrapped ships. They gave speeches about respecting our law. They did exactly what any cornered species does, Thulrek Vex said quietly. We wrote a law meant to disarm them, and instead of accepting it, they built something the law never anticipated. I confess, I did not think they had the industrial capacity for a vessel of this scale, let alone the ability to hide its construction from our observation for 2 full years. What matters now is our response, said the Orith representative, an elder named Cressa who had, though few in the chamber knew it, received a private report from her kinswoman Sressa 2 years earlier, suggesting exactly this kind of deception might be underway, a report that had been quietly dismissed by the council at the time as unlikely speculation. This single ship cannot be allowed to stand unanswered. If we permit humanity this victory without response, every species watching this war will conclude that our laws mean nothing against a determined enough opponent. Thulrek Vex nodded slowly. Then we respond with everything we have, not a relief fleet, not a border patrol, a full battle fleet, drawn from every willing member species, sufficient to destroy this ship regardless of its size or power. We end this threat before it can grow any larger. The vote, when it came, was nearly unanimous. Within a week, orders went out across Concord space, summoning warships from dozens of member worlds, gathering the largest combined fleet the Concord had assembled in over 1,000 years. Aboard Colossus, Elena Voss received intelligence reports of the Concord's mobilization, with grim, unsurprised acceptance. We knew this was coming, she told her senior staff, gathered in the ship's war room 3 weeks after the Battle of Ashworth Prime. One decisive victory was never going to end this war on its own. The Concord has spent 3,000 years believing their power is unquestionable. We just proved otherwise, and now they're going to throw everything they have at proving us wrong. How large a fleet are we talking about? Diego Alvarez asked. Our best estimates put it between 100 and 150 vessels, Elena said, drawn from at least a dozen Concord member species, including at least 6 additional dreadnoughts beyond the 2 we destroyed at Ashworth. This will not be a battle we can win through surprise, the way we won the last one. They know what we are now. They will come prepared. Rajiv Okafor leaned forward, studying the tactical projections on the war room's main display. The spine cannon needs several minutes to recharge between full-power shots. Against a fleet that size, we won't be able to eliminate their heaviest ships fast enough to prevent significant damage to our own hull, even with our shield capacity. Then we don't fight this the way we fought Ashworth, Elena said. We fight it the way this ship was actually designed to fight. Marcus, remind everyone what we built this ship to survive. Marcus Chen, still carrying the quiet exhaustion of 2 years of construction and weeks of anxious testing, nodded and pulled up a detailed schematic of the ship's defensive systems. Colossus wasn't built purely as an offensive weapon. Every design choice we made accounted for the possibility of facing overwhelming numbers. Our shield capacity, our armor thickness, our point defense network, all of it was built assuming we would eventually face exactly this kind of fleet. We can take punishment no Concord ship has ever been designed to survive. We just need to use that endurance wisely. Preparations for what would come to be known as the Battle of the Kepler Line took nearly a month, as the Concord fleet gathered and moved slowly toward human territory, and as Colossus, along with a supporting force of the Republic's remaining smaller warships, prepared a defense along a stretch of contested space near the Kepler belt that offered the best tactical advantages available. Diego Alvarez spent that month running his tactical crews through simulation after simulation, testing every possible configuration of Concord forces the fleet might encounter, refining response protocols for scenarios ranging from coordinated dreadnought assaults to overwhelming numbers of smaller escort vessels attempting to swarm the ship's point defense network. They'll have learned from Ashworth, Diego told his officers during one such session. They won't send their dreadnoughts in first and alone. They'll try to overwhelm our point defense with numbers, keep us occupied with smaller ships while their heavy vessels maneuver for a coordinated strike. We need response protocols that don't just handle one threat at a time. Priya Nair, meanwhile, worked with her reactor team to squeeze every possible efficiency out of the 9-core power cluster, searching for ways to reduce the spine cannon's recharge time without risking the containment failures that had haunted her nightmares since the earliest days of the project. I can shave maybe 40 seconds off the recharge cycle, she told Elena, 2 weeks before the expected battle, by running the cores closer to their safety margins during the charging sequence. It's not risk-free. If something goes wrong during a rapid recharge, the failure could be more severe than anything we've tested for. Do it, Elena said. 40 seconds might be the difference between destroying their next dreadnought and losing ships of our own while we wait to fire again. Marcus Chen spent the month overseeing hull reinforcements and shield calibrations, working with Rajiv Okafor to optimize the ship's point defense network for the specific threat profile Concord forces were expected to present. He also spent time, in quieter moments, walking the ship's corridors, talking with crew members who had fought at Ashworth and would soon face a battle on a scale none of them, including Elena Voss herself, had ever truly experienced. A young weapons technician asked him, during one of these walks, 3 days before the Concord fleet was expected to arrive. Marcus considered the question with the same careful honesty he always brought to difficult questions. We're as ready as 2 years of work and one real battle can make us, he said. I won't lie to you and say there's no risk. This fleet is bigger and better prepared than anything we faced at Ashworth. But I built this ship to survive exactly this kind of fight. I believe in it. I believe in all of you. The Concord fleet arrived at the edge of the Kepler belt on a morning that felt, to everyone aboard Colossus, both endless and impossibly short, the culmination of a month of preparation, compressed into a single tense hour of waiting, as sensor readings confirmed the scale of the approaching force. 131 vessels, including 6 dreadnoughts, appeared on Colossus's long-range sensors, arranged in a formation clearly designed to prevent any single decisive strike from repeating the outcome at Ashworth Prime. The dreadnoughts held back at the formation's center, protected by layers of smaller escort vessels, while faster attack craft spread wide, positioned to swarm human point defense systems from multiple directions at once. They learned, Diego Alvarez said quietly, studying the tactical display. This isn't the formation of a fleet expecting an easy victory. This is the formation of a fleet that's afraid of us. Good, Elena said. Fear makes for cautious enemies, and cautious enemies make mistakes. Rajiv, status on the spine cannon? Charged and ready, Admiral. Target lock available on the lead dreadnought, as soon as they close to effective range. All hands, Elena said, her voice carrying across the ship's internal broadcast system to every crew member aboard. This is Admiral Voss. The fleet approaching us represents the largest force the Concorde has assembled in over 1,000 years, gathered for the sole purpose of destroying this ship and everything it represents. They are afraid of us, and they have every reason to be. We are not going to give them a reason to feel confident again. The Republic's supporting fleet, 40 smaller warships positioned around Colossus in a defensive formation designed by Diego Alvarez over weeks of careful planning, held their positions as the Concorde force closed the final distance, weapons ready, waiting for the order that would begin the largest battle of the entire war. Range to lead elements, 30,000 kilometers and closing, the tactical officer reported. 25,000, 20,000. Elena Voss watched the approaching fleet on the main display, thought of Meridian, of Ashworth, of 11 years of a war that had cost humanity more than any single battle report could ever fully capture, and gave the order that would decide whether 2 years of secrecy and sacrifice had truly been worth their terrible cost. Spine cannon, target the lead dreadnought, she said. All ships, weapons free. Let's finish what we started at Ashworth. The first shot of the Battle of the Kepler Line crossed the gap between fleets in less than 2 seconds, striking the lead Concorde dreadnought with the same devastating force that had destroyed the Patient Resolve weeks before. The great vessel broke apart under the impact, venting atmosphere and debris into the void, its destruction visible even to the smaller ships positioned kilometers away. But this time, the Concorde fleet did not scatter in confusion. This time, they had come prepared. Multiple contacts breaking formation, the tactical officer reported, her voice rising with tension. They're converging on our position from 3 directions at once. Estimate 40 small attack craft inbound. Weapons range in 90 seconds. Point defense, full spread, Diego Alvarez ordered, his voice cutting through the rising noise of the bridge with practiced calm. Priority targeting on anything that gets within 5,000 kilometers. Secondary batteries, support the defense fleet against the escort screen. What followed was unlike anything Colossus had faced at Ashworth Prime. Where the first battle had been a swift, one-sided demonstration of overwhelming power, the Battle of the Kepler Line quickly became something closer to a siege, as wave after wave of smaller Concorde vessels threw themselves against the ship's defenses, attempting to overwhelm its point defense network through sheer numbers, while the remaining dreadnoughts maneuvered carefully at the edges of the engagement, waiting for an opening. Colossus's hull shuddered under the impact of concentrated fire from dozens of smaller vessels at once, shields flaring bright against strikes that would have destroyed any smaller human ship outright. Priya Nair, monitoring the reactor cluster from her station, deep within the ship, watched power readings climb toward dangerous thresholds as the ship's systems worked to maintain both offensive and defensive capability simultaneously. Shield integrity at 83%, she reported. We're holding, but this rate of sustained fire is higher than anything we tested for. Second dreadnought is making its move, the tactical officer reported, coming in from our starboard flank, using the escort screen as cover. Rajiv, cannon status, Elena said. Recharge cycle at 70%, Admiral. 90 more seconds until we can fire again. Elena studied the tactical display, watching the second dreadnought advance behind a screen of smaller vessels, designed specifically to absorb the ship's secondary weapons fire and buy time for a coordinated strike. It was, she recognized, exactly the kind of adaptation Diego had predicted weeks before. An enemy that had learned from its first defeat and now sought to negate Colossus's greatest advantage through patient, sacrificial numbers. Diego, concentrate secondary fire on clearing a path through that escort screen, she said. I want a clean shot on that dreadnought the moment the cannon recharges. The battle raged for nearly 2 hours, longer than any single engagement of the war's previous 11 years, as Colossus and its supporting fleet fought to hold their position against a Concord force, determined not to repeat the humiliation of Ashworth Prime. 3 of the Republic's smaller supporting warships were lost in the first hour, their crews evacuated where possible, their sacrifice buying crucial time for Colossus's point defense network to thin the swarming attack craft that threatened to overwhelm the larger ship's defenses. Diego Alvarez coordinated the defense with a focus that left no room for the fear he had felt in the opening minutes of the engagement, directing fire patterns and defensive maneuvers with the practiced skill of 11 years of combat experience, now finally applied to a ship capable of matching that skill with genuine power. "Third dreadnought attempting to flank our position," he reported, watching the tactical display shift as Concord commanders adjusted their strategy in response to mounting losses among the escort screen. "They're trying to get a clean shot at our aft shield generators." "Not going to happen," Elena said. "Helm, bring us about 15 degrees to starboard. Keep our strongest shields facing that approach vector." Rajiv Okafor's spine cannon, firing at its maximum sustainable rate, with Priya Nair's reactor cluster running at the very edge of safe capacity, claimed the second dreadnought 40 minutes into the battle, then the third nearly an hour after that, each shot requiring a careful balance of timing and targeting that left no margin for error. By the time the 4th Concord dreadnought fell to a combined strike from the spine cannon and a coordinated volley from the Republic's remaining supporting ships, the tide of the battle had begun, unmistakably, to shift. "Remaining Concord forces are breaking formation," the tactical officer reported, relief evident in her voice for the first time in nearly 2 hours. 2 dreadnoughts remaining, along with approximately 30 smaller vessels. "They're, Admiral, I think they're preparing to retreat." Elena studied the tactical display, watching the once overwhelming Concord fleet reduced to a fraction of its original strength, its commanders finally recognizing what every Concord admiral watching from a safe distance would soon come to understand. That Colossus was not simply a powerful ship, but a fundamental shift in what was possible for a species the Concord had spent 3,000 years believing they understood. "Let them go," she said quietly. "We've made our point. There's no need to destroy every ship in that fleet to prove it." The Battle of the Kepler Line ended with the destruction of 4 Concord dreadnoughts and over 60 smaller vessels, against the loss of 3 Republic warships, and significant but survivable damage to Colossus itself. It was, by any measure, the largest and most decisive human victory of the entire 11-year war, fought against a fleet that had been gathered specifically to prevent exactly this outcome. Marcus Chen walked the ship's damaged sections in the hours after the battle, assessing hull breaches and shield generator damage with the same careful attention he had once given to the ship's original construction, relieved beyond words to find that despite the punishment Colossus had absorbed, every critical system remained intact. "We held," he told Elena, finding her on the bridge in the quiet aftermath of the engagement, the adrenaline of battle slowly giving way to exhaustion across the entire crew. 2 hours of concentrated fire from over 100 ships, and we held. "You built it to hold," Elena said. "I never doubted that, Marcus, not once." Priya Nair, still monitoring her reactor cluster for any lingering signs of stress from 2 hours of sustained maximum output, allowed herself a rare moment of quiet satisfaction, watching her instruments settle back toward normal operating parameters. 9 cores, she said, echoing words she had spoken once before, on the day the reactor cluster first came online. "I still don't know if building something this large was the most impressive thing I've ever done, or the most ridiculous. But today, I think I'm finally willing to say it was worth it." Diego Alvarez, exhausted but unmistakably proud, looked out at the tactical display, at the scattered wreckage of a fleet that had, just hours before, seemed unstoppable. 4 dreadnoughts, he said quietly. "In one battle. 11 years of this war, and I never thought I'd see a day like today." "Don't get too comfortable," Elena said, though there was something almost gentle in her voice as she said it. "The Concord Council isn't going to accept this defeat quietly. This war isn't over yet. But today, we proved something they needed to understand. We proved that humanity cannot be legislated into submission, no matter how carefully the law is written." Above them, through the bridge's main viewport, the wreckage of the largest Concord fleet assembled in 1,000 years drifted slowly through the dark, a silent testament to 2 years of secrecy, sacrifice, and the stubborn refusal of a young species to accept a law written for its defeat. News of the Battle of the Kepler Line reached the Concord Council within a day, carried by the handful of surviving vessels that had managed to escape the engagement. High Speaker Thulrek Vex received the report in a private chamber, away from the eyes of the wider council, and read it twice before setting it down, his hands, old and steady after centuries of service, trembling slightly for the first time in longer than he could remember. 4 dreadnoughts. 60 smaller vessels, a fleet larger than anything gathered in 1,000 years, broken in a single afternoon by one human ship and a handful of supporting vessels. They are not going to stop, he said quietly, to the empty chamber, to no one in particular. We built a law to make them small, and instead, we have made them into something we no longer understand. When the full council convened 3 days later, the mood in the chamber was unlike anything Thulrek Vex had witnessed in over 200 years of service. Where the first emergency session after Ashworth Prime had been dominated by anger and calls for immediate, overwhelming retaliation, this session carried a different tone entirely, something closer to the beginning of fear. We cannot simply gather another fleet and expect a different outcome, said the representative of a species called the Dorith, whose homeworld had contributed 12 ships to the fleet destroyed at Kepler, 8 of which had not returned. This human vessel has now defeated 2 fleets, one drawn from our best remaining forces. If we continue to answer this ship with numbers alone, we will simply continue losing ships we cannot easily replace. Then what do you propose? Asked the Vashtu representative, still bitter with grief for ships and crews lost at Kepler. That we simply accept this humiliation? That we allow one human vessel to stand as proof that our laws mean nothing? Thulrek Vex rose slowly, and the chamber, out of long habit and respect for his age and experience, fell quiet to hear him. I propose, he said, that we consider what kind of species we have truly been dealing with these past 11 years. We assumed, when this war began, that humanity was simply a young species that had not yet learned patience, that time and pressure would eventually teach them their place among us, as it has taught every young species before them. We were wrong. This is not a species that will be taught patience by pressure. Pressure, it seems, only makes them build larger and more dangerous answers to whatever problem we set before them. He paused, looking around the chamber at the assembled representatives of 30 species who had, until recently, believed their combined strength unquestionable. We have 2 paths remaining, he said. We gather every ship in Concord space, every dreadnought, every reserve fleet, and we commit everything we have to destroying this single vessel, accepting whatever losses that requires. Or we consider, for the first time in this war, whether continuing to fight a species capable of building something like this is truly in the Concord's best interest. The chamber erupted into argument, voices rising in a dozen different languages, some calling for total war, others, quieter, but growing louder, beginning for the first time to speak of negotiation. Thulrek Vex sat back down and did not join the arguing voices, because he already understood, with the tired certainty of a man who had seen empires rise and fall across 3 centuries of service, that the war humanity had been fighting for 11 years was about to end, one way or another, and that the ending would not look anything like what the Concord had originally intended when it wrote a law meant to make one stubborn species small. The Concord Council debated for 11 days before reaching a decision, the longest deliberation in the Council's recorded history, longer even than the original declaration of war against humanity 11 years before. Aboard Colossus, still undergoing repairs from the Battle of the Kepler Line, Elena Voss and her senior staff received updates on the Council's deliberations through a careful network of intelligence sources, some human, some drawn from smaller Concord member species, who had grown quietly uneasy with the war's direction, long before humanity had ever built a ship large enough to challenge it directly. They're split, Marcus Chen reported, reading through the latest intelligence summary in the ship's war room. About a third of the council wants to commit everything, every ship they have, to one final attempt at destroying us. Another third wants to open negotiations. The rest are somewhere in between, waiting to see which way the larger factions move before committing themselves. And if the war faction wins? Diego Alvarez asked. Then we should expect a fleet larger than anything we've faced yet, Elena said. Possibly 200 ships, maybe more, drawn from every Concord member species willing to commit forces. If that happens, Marcus, I need to know honestly. Can Colossus survive an engagement on that scale? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with the same careful honesty he had brought to every difficult decision of the past 2 years. We survived Kepler, but it cost us. Shield generators on the aft section took damage that will take another 2 weeks to fully repair. If they come at us again before those repairs are complete, with a fleet twice the size we faced at Kepler, I don't know if we hold. The room fell silent at that admission, the first time in the ship's short combat history that Marcus Chen had openly expressed doubt about his own design. Then we need those 2 weeks, Elena said finally, and we need a plan for what happens if the Concorde decides not to give them to us. Priya Nair spent those uncertain days pushing her reactor cluster and shield generation systems toward efficiencies she had once considered theoretical, driven by the same quiet fear that had settled over the entire senior staff since Marcus's admission in the war room. Rajiv Okafor, meanwhile, worked on a modification to the spine cannon's targeting systems that would allow faster target acquisition against multiple threats, hoping to shave crucial seconds off the ship's response time in the event of another large-scale engagement. Diego Alvarez drilled his tactical crews relentlessly, refining defensive formations based on lessons learned at Kepler, preparing for a battle that might be significantly larger and more dangerous than anything Colossus had yet faced. And Elena Voss, in the quiet hours between briefings and repair updates, found herself thinking often of the conversation she had once had with Marcus Chen, in a tired office in New Shanghai, 2 years, and what felt like an entire lifetime ago. They had built this ship to change what winning a war against the Concorde even meant. She hoped, with a hope she rarely allowed herself to voice aloud, that the change they had created would be enough to end the war without requiring Colossus to face a battle it might not survive. On the 12th day after the Battle of the Kepler Line, that hope received an unexpected answer. A single Concorde vessel, unarmed and flying under a formal diplomatic signal that had not been used against humanity in over a decade, requested permission to approach Colossus's position. Elena Voss authorized the approach personally, standing on the bridge with Diego Alvarez and Marcus Chen beside her, as the small ship closed the distance, its identity confirmed by long-range sensors as an official Concorde Council diplomatic vessel. The representative who requested contact, once the ship arrived, was High Speaker Thulrek Vex himself, appearing on Colossus's main view screen, in the careful, measured manner the Concorde had used in every formal communication since the war began. Though something in his bearing, Elena noted immediately, was different from the confident, dismissive tone of previous Concorde diplomacy. "Admiral Voss," he said, through the translation system that rendered his words in careful, formal standard. "I speak for the Concorde Council. I have come to discuss the possibility of ending this war." Elena kept her expression carefully neutral, though beside her, she felt Diego Alvarez tense with barely contained hope. "I'm listening, High Speaker." 11 years ago, Thulrek Vex said, "the Concorde went to war with your species, believing we understood what kind of conflict we were entering. We believed, as we have believed with every young species that has challenged our authority in 3,000 years, that time and patience would eventually teach you your place among the stars. We were wrong. Your species does not learn patience through pressure. It learns to build larger and more determined answers to whatever pressure we apply." He paused, and Elena thought she saw, in his old, alien features, something that might have been genuine regret. The ship accord was written specifically to deny your species the advantages that had allowed you to win battles you should not have won. We believed it would force you into a war you could not sustain. Instead, it convinced you to build a weapon that has now destroyed 2 of our largest fleets in the space of 2 months. The Council has spent 11 days debating whether to commit everything we have to destroying that weapon, regardless of the cost. I have come here, ahead of that final decision, to ask whether there is another path available to us. "There is," Elena said. "There has always been another path, High Speaker. Recognition of human sovereignty over our own territory. An end to the size restrictions your ship accord placed on our vessels, restrictions that were never applied fairly to your own fleets. And a formal peace treaty, negotiated between equals, not dictated by a council that has spent this entire war assuming our defeat was simply a matter of time." Thulrek Vex was quiet for a long moment, considering her words with the careful deliberation of a diplomat who had spent centuries learning to weigh consequences before speaking. Equals, he said finally. That is a word the Concord has rarely used to describe any species beyond our own founding members, in 3,000 years of history. But I confess, Admiral, after watching the footage from Kepler, after reading reports of a ship 4 kilometers long, built in secret behind a hidden shipyard for 2 years without our knowledge, I find myself struggling to argue with the word. Perhaps it is time the Concord learned to use it more often. Negotiations that followed Thulrek Vex's initial contact took nearly 3 weeks, conducted aboard a neutral Concord diplomatic station, in territory claimed by neither side, with Arya Kowalski traveling personally from Earth to lead the Republic's delegation, alongside Elena Voss, whose presence, as the commander of the ship that had ended 2 major battles, carried weight the Concord Council could not easily dismiss. The war faction within the Council did not surrender its position easily. Several member species, including the Vashtu, whose destruction of an unarmed human survey ship had started the war 11 years before, argued fiercely for continued conflict, unwilling to accept a peace that would grant humanity full sovereignty and remove the size restrictions that had once seemed like such an elegant solution to the problem of a dangerously capable young species. But the argument that ultimately carried the Council, more than any diplomatic appeal from either side, was simple and undeniable. Colossus existed, its repairs nearly complete, its crew rested and ready, and no fleet the Concord could realistically assemble had proven capable of destroying it. Continued war meant continued losses, continued humiliation, and no guarantee of an outcome any different from the 2 battles already fought and lost. We cannot unbuild what they have already built, Thulrek Vex told the Council, in the final session before the treaty vote. We cannot unlearn what we have learned about this species' capacity for defiance. The question before us is not whether humanity has become powerful enough to challenge us. That question has already been answered, at Ashworth and at Kepler. The only question remaining is whether we wish to continue paying the cost of denying that reality, or whether we are wise enough to accept it and build a peace that allows both our peoples to move forward from this war. The treaty that resulted, signed on a quiet morning aboard the neutral diplomatic station, formally ended the 11-year war between humanity and the Galactic Concord. It recognized full human sovereignty over Republic territory. It repealed the ship accord's size restrictions entirely, not just for human vessels, but for every Concord member species, a concession Thulrek Vex had argued for personally, understanding that a law written to control one species could not fairly be maintained against only that species going forward. And it established, for the first time in Concord history, a formal seat on the Council for Human Representation, granted not as a gift from an older, wiser power, but as a recognition that humanity had, through 11 years of costly and hard-fought war, earned a place among the galaxy's great powers. Elena Voss stood on Colossus's observation deck on the day the treaty was formally ratified, looking out at the stars beyond, at the same view she had once studied from a much smaller station, in the earliest days of a project that had seemed, at the time, almost impossibly ambitious. Marcus Chen joined her there, along with Diego Alvarez, Priya Nair, and Rajiv Okafor, the small circle of people who had, more than anyone else, built the ship that ended the war. 2 years, Marcus said quietly, looking up at the vast hull stretching away above them. 2 years of secrecy, and one battle that almost broke us at Kepler, and now it's over. I keep waiting for it to feel real. It's real, Elena said. The Concord signed a treaty granting us full sovereignty. They repealed a law they wrote specifically to keep us small. That happened because of what we built here, together. Diego Alvarez, who had lost friends at Tau Ceti and Liberty Station, and a dozen other battles across 11 years of grinding, patient war, looked out at the stars with an expression that mixed hard-won relief with something like quiet grief for everyone who had not lived to see this moment. I keep thinking about Meridian, he said quietly, about everyone we lost before this ship was ready. I wish we could have built it faster. I wish we could have saved more people. I know, Elena said. I think about that too, every day. But we built what we could, as fast as we could, and when it was ready, it ended a war that might otherwise have ground on for another decade or more. We can't change what happened before Colossus existed. We can only be grateful for what it made possible afterward. Priya Nair, who had spent 2 years worrying over 9 fusion cores that had, in the end, never failed when it mattered most, looked up at the ship's vast hull with something like genuine pride for the first time since the project began. 9 cores, she said, for the 3rd time in 2 years, though this time, there was no uncertainty in her voice at all. The most impressive thing I've ever built. I don't think I need to wonder about that anymore. The Concorde's declaration that humanity's ships were illegal had been meant to make a stubborn young species small, to force it back into the slow, patient rhythm of a war the Concorde believed it could not lose. Instead, it had convinced humanity to build something the law had never imagined, a single vessel, so large and so powerful that it had rendered the entire question of legal ship sizes meaningless, ending in victory, a war that pressure alone had never been able to win. Colossus remained, in the years that followed, a symbol as much as a weapon, a reminder to every species in the newly expanded Concorde that patience and pressure could not always be relied upon to teach a determined people their place among the stars. Sometimes, when you tried to make a species small, that species built something enormous instead, and changed, forever, what the galaxy believed was possible. Elena Voss stood on the observation deck a while longer, watching the stars, thinking of everything it had taken to reach this moment, and found herself, for the first time in 11 years of war, simply grateful for the quiet. The war was over. Humanity had ended it, not by learning to be small, but by refusing to be, and building instead the largest answer anyone in the galaxy had ever seen, to a law that was never meant to be obeyed. In the months that followed the signing of the treaty, life across human space began, slowly and unevenly, to settle into something that resembled peace, a condition so unfamiliar to a generation that had grown up during 11 years of war that many people struggled to fully believe in it. Arya Kowalski returned to the Republic capital to oversee the enormous task of transitioning a wartime economy back toward peacetime production, a challenge nearly as difficult, in its own way, as the war itself had been. Shipyards that had spent years building warships began, gradually, to shift toward civilian construction, toward colony ships and transport vessels, and the ordinary infrastructure of a species finally free to look beyond simple survival. She gave a speech, on the first anniversary of the treaty's signing, standing before a crowd gathered in the same chamber where she had once told the World Council that humanity needed a third option, an answer the Concorde had not thought of. 11 years ago, she said, we were told our existence was a problem to be managed. 2 years ago, we were told our ships were illegal, that our success in this war was itself a violation of law. We did not accept either judgment. We built our own answer, at tremendous cost, and today, we stand as equals among the stars, not because anyone granted us that status, but because we earned it, through the courage of everyone who served aboard Colossus, and everyone who fought and died in this war, before that ship was ever ready to fly. Diego Alvarez remained aboard Colossus for another 2 years after the war's end, serving as the ship's permanent tactical commander during a period the Republic government came to call the Consolidation, as humanity worked to integrate its new seat on the Concorde Council and establish the diplomatic relationships that peacetime demanded. He visited Ashworth Prime once during that period, standing in the same district that had been under Concorde bombardment on the day Colossus first arrived to break the siege. Governor Elise Marchetti, who had led the colony through 3 weeks of siege and had wept watching footage of the battle that saved her people, greeted him personally and showed him a small memorial the colony had built, honoring both the Republic defenders who had died before Colossus arrived and the ship itself, whose image was etched into a simple stone marker at the memorial's center. We don't forget, Marchetti told him, how close we came to a very different ending. Every person on this world understands what that ship meant and what it cost to build it. Diego thought of the 2 crew members whose photo he had once kept in his quarters, lost in a skirmish that should never have happened, in a war that a bigger, better ship might have ended sooner. He thought of Meridian, of the 2 million people who had not been so fortunate as Ashworth Prime. He said nothing of this to Governor Marchetti, but he carried the weight of it with him, quietly, for the rest of his life, a reminder that victory, however decisive, never fully erased the cost of everything that came before it. Marcus Chen returned to New Shanghai Station 6 months after the treaty's signing, reunited at last with the daughter who had sent him messages he had often been too exhausted to answer, now 13 years old, and full of questions about the ship her father had spent 2 years building in secret. "Is it true it's 4 kilometers long?" she asked him, on the first evening he was truly home, no longer bound by the endless demands of a project that had once consumed every waking hour of his life. 4.2 actually, Marcus said, smiling for what felt like the first time in years. "We added a little extra to the hangar bays in the final redesign." "Will you build another one?" she asked. Marcus considered the question for a long moment, thinking of 2 years without proper sleep, of the constant fear that some small oversight might doom the entire project, of the terrible night he had spent staring at sensor logs after a Concorde patrol had nearly discovered the hidden shipyard. "I hope I never have to," he said honestly. "I built Colossus because I believed it was the only way to end a war that was costing us too much, for too long. I'm glad it worked, but I would rather spend the rest of my career building ships that never need to fight at all." Priya Nair remained with the Republic's Naval Engineering Corps, eventually leading the design team responsible for adapting Colossus's reactor technology for civilian use, developing power systems that would, in the years that followed, help fuel humanity's expansion into new systems across a galaxy no longer closed to human ambition by treaties written to keep a stubborn young species small. Rajiv Okafor, for his part, became something of a reluctant celebrity within Republic military circles, the designer of the spine cannon that had ended 2 of the war's most decisive battles, though he insisted, whenever asked about his contribution, that the weapon had only ever been as good as the ship built to carry it, and the crew brave enough to fire it in humanity's defense. Elena Voss remained in command of Colossus for the rest of her naval career, watching over a ship that transitioned, slowly, from the weapon that had ended a war to a symbol of what a determined, stubborn species could accomplish when pushed to its absolute limit. She gave few public speeches about the ship or the war it had ended, preferring instead to let the ship itself, and the peace it had helped secure, speak for what had truly been accomplished. But on quiet evenings, standing on the same observation deck where she had once watched a skeleton of alloy slowly grow into the largest ship humanity had ever built, she sometimes thought back to that first tired conversation with Marcus Chen, in an office in New Shanghai, when the entire project had been nothing more than a desperate idea, born from a law meant to make humanity small. They had not accepted that law. They had built something the Concorde had never imagined, and in doing so, had changed not just the outcome of one war, but the fundamental terms under which humanity would take its place among the stars, not as a species to be managed and contained, but as one that had earned, through courage and stubbornness and 2 years of secret, exhausting work, the right to stand as an equal among the oldest powers in the galaxy. The Concorde had declared human ships illegal. Humanity had answered by building one big enough that the question of legality no longer mattered at all, and in doing so, had ended, at last, a war that pressure and patience alone had never been able to win.